So here we are in the temporary basement studio. I've got something really important I want to talk to you about today. Do you get caught in the trap of fixing things in post? We've all heard that, right? We'll fix it in post. I have been there, and today we're going to talk about doing it right from the get-go. Let's go. So today we're talking about mastering the basics of your camera. The things I'm going to talk about can apply to any camera that you're using when you're shooting videos in a way that we can all make our footage look better. There were so many times for me when I would just rush through shooting something as long as I had basically the right angles, but I didn't pay enough attention to the initial settings on my camera, so it made my editing work so much harder, and I would just dread all the things that I knew I would end up having to fix. So getting your camera settings right, proper white balance, color, all of these things are gonna give us less time editing and post-processing all of our videos and gonna make life so much better. So all these settings we're talking about today are all in an effort to get us that coveted cinematic look. Now, first thing is pretty basic. We're talking about frame rate. If you watched any videos about this before, when we're not going for slow motion or anything like that, we're looking to be set at 24 frames per second. This is gonna give us the most natural looking footage, a natural motion blur closer to what our eye would typically see, and this is gonna give us more of that movie look. Now when you're set at either 1080p or in 4K at 24 frames, you're gonna wanna make sure your shutter speed is at double your frame rate. So you're at 24 frames, you wanna be at about 48 for your shutter speed, which on most cameras, it's gonna be 50. That's as close as you can get. Now when you do go for slow motion, you're gonna shoot in a higher frame rate, say 60 frames or 120 frames, whatever you prefer or whatever your camera will let you do. And then you're gonna end up slowing that down, so essentially you're still ending up at 24 frames in your timeline once that's slowed down. That being said, when you are at 60 frames, again, you wanna make sure that your shutter speed is double your frame rate. So we're talking 120 on your camera, it's likely 125. If you're shooting in 120 frames per second, it's probably gonna be 250 for you. But these are all gonna keep you in that look and keep you from getting that more realistic look. It's almost like a soap opera once you get into those higher frame rates. So we talked about shutter speed and frame rates and how those relate to the look of your video. Now we're gonna move into ISO, or ISO as some people call it. I really don't think there's a right or wrong answer there. And aperture, what some people also call f-stop. ISO is essentially gain that your camera can add to the footage to make it brighter. However, it is rather unnatural and you have to be really careful with how much you add or your footage can get really noisy, really super grainy, and that's not a good look. Generally for video, I'm at 100, as low as I can go, because that's gonna give you the cleanest, best look from the Canon cameras that I use. That being said, sometimes you have to raise that because you just don't have the light. I generally try to stay around 1600, maybe 3200 at the most. Obviously, to do that, the best thing is always to bring in additional light where you can. Now the aperture and where you end up with that really hugely depends on your lens, what you can actually do with that. If you have a faster lens that can get down to around 1.8, 1.4, that means your lens is actually gonna let in a lot more light and you can get away with lower ISO values and lower light in the room. At those lower aperture values, you also get more depth of field. So you get more in focus on your subject and more out of focus on the background, which is great. Sometimes you do want that, sometimes you don't, but that's another way to adjust kind of the look that you're going for in your video. Once you start raising that up, you get a little bit less and less depth of field, a little less difference between your focus on your subject and your background. All right guys, so one big thing that I almost left out is to talk about ND filters. This stands for neutral density. And the way I hear most people describe these, it's like sunglasses for your camera. like that. What these do is it allows you to stay at that shutter speed and that frame rate and the ISO value that you want to keep that depth of field, to keep that cinematic look, but shoot outside in a bright space. If you walk out there without the ND filter at those values, you are basically gonna see white, and that is no bueno. So you take one of these, put it on your camera, and it is magic. I had no idea when I first started out how much I needed one of these, and it's a game changer. This is an absolute necessity if you're shooting video outside. I have one on here right now to make this happen. I'm gonna take it off and show you what it looks like. Right? You probably can't even see me right now. It's probably just white. So, get yourself an ND filter. I'll link the one I use below. The filter that I use is also adjustable so that you can make it brighter or darker simply by twisting the filter. This attaches to the threads on the end of your lens, so you need to make sure you get the one that matches the diameter of your lens, or there is a way to get these little step-up rings that you can fit the same ND filter on multiple diameter lenses. I'll link those below too. Now, back to the other video. Another thing we get into when we're talking about the looks of our videos is picture profiles. Now, for a long time, I did not have a clue. I was trying to figure out exactly how these worked, exactly what I wanted. I know there's settings in there for brightness, contrast, sharpness. I really honestly had no idea what I was looking at or really what I was looking for in the picture profiles. Once I really started getting into them, it made a little bit more sense. I've also loaded a log profile, which I'm sure you've heard a lot of people talk about, into my camera, which gives you a really flat look on your video, but what it actually does is bring up some of those shadows, bring down some of those highlights, so you actually preserve just a little bit more dynamic range in your footage, but it does take a lot more in post-processing to get that footage to look exactly like you want. Now, in the beginning, that was really tough for me because I feel like it takes a lot of practice to get color correction and that kind of stuff just right. And even now for my vlogs, something that needs to be done fairly quickly, or even a lot of things just shooting inside, I find that log is just a little bit overkill, and all it does is add time to my editing. So typically for me, I've ended up on the faithful picture profile on Canon cameras. I really like the colors it gives me, and my footage always really comes out like I want it to. The best thing for you to do is just experiment. Shoot some of the same shots on different picture profiles and find what you like. And in the end, what is the best thing you can do? Practice, practice, practice. This is the case when it comes to anything. You're not gonna get better unless you just do it. So practice and experiment with all of these settings. Find the settings that you like. Don't just rely on what I tell you or what you see from somebody else. Find what you like, find the perfect shots and settings for yourself. Even for me, as I've started this vlog, as I'm doing it, things change every time. I feel like I learn more and I get better, so just do some work. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining me again. Drop an elbow on that like button. That's right, I said that. Hit that subscribe button and the bell so you get notified when new episodes come up. Comment below, which picture profile are you using on which camera and why? I wanna know. So get out there, try a bunch of different settings, find your own look that you love for your footage, and I will see you next time. Are you still here? Hit this button right here in the middle. Subscribe. Please, 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 please. Watch these videos if you want. You might like them.